To give a boost to innovative companies, a global startup festival was held for 3 days this week in Daejeon, some 160 kilometers south of Seoul. Some 300 participants from Korea and abroad attended the event, including startups, investors, and government officials from 8 countries. Among the startup supporters was Slush, one of the largest non-profit startup conferences in Finland. Slush has organized conferences in Tokyo, Shanghai, and Singapore, and serves as a bridge between startups and investors to nurture venture companies. During the 3-day event, Andreas Saari, CEO of Slush, sat down with Arirang TV for in-depth discussion on how startups, including those in Korea, can prosper on the global stage as well as some challenges they face today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Saari, for taking the time to sit with us for this interview. Well, I like to begin with some questions here. So, you work for Slush, and we heard that Slush is actually one of the leading venture company, conferences in Finland. So, could you tell us a bit more about Slush for our viewers?
Sure. I think Slush is a combination of 2 stories, really. First, started by a handful of Finnish entrepreneurs, just to gather their friends together, and then later taken over by students in 2011. That's when it really started scaling into one of the leading events in Europe. Today we are at a 2019 event. Will have 25,000 unique visitors, including between 3,000 and 4,000 startups, about 2,000 investors, some 700-800 journalists, more than 500 C-level executives from different large corporations. And what it really is a kind of melting pot. So it brings all of these different people together, along with academics and students, actually. So the Slush, the thing that people usually recognize when they talk about Slush is the 2-day event in Helsinki. But that's not all of it. That's the crown jewel and still one of the biggest single gathering that we do. But there's also more other events around the world and other different kinds of concepts and services that we do to entrepreneurs. But ultimately, everything that we do has to help entrepreneurs one way or another.
So you support these entrepreneurs. So what was the reason or motive behind all this, to start all this?
I think back when Slush was started, it was really, it was born out of a need. It wasn't born because a governmental player or any large organization top down wanted to have something like this, but it was a group of students who realized that Finland had a couple of problems. First of all, we needed to create more jobs if we wanted to pay the social welfare system that exists in Finland, because we have an aging population, like many other countries as well. So we needed more jobs, and the most likely place to create more jobs is to create more companies, and especially fast, internationally growing companies. But to get there, 3 problems needed to be fixed. The first being just the overall attitudes in the Finnish society towards entrepreneurship. It wasn't really a popular option back in around 2010 or so. The second thing is that kind of the knowledge that is required for building a company like that, or the skills, or even the ambition, weren't really there, especially among young people. They didn't have too many examples and role models that had built companies by themselves to look up to. But then slowly they started emerging. And finally, the third problem, funding and availability of venture capital, wasn't really that great back then. So Slush set out solving all these 3 challenges.
Also, were there any difficulties in nurturing these startups, or what has been the biggest achievement so far?
And last year we had about 15,000 meetings at that event, and kind of what then defines our success is how many companies get funded, how many companies get new clients or new partners, how many companies hire new people, so find new talent. And kind of as we have been working, and many other people beyond Slush have also been working towards the same goals in Finland and in the Nordic countries and in Europe, the biggest bottleneck for growing companies right now is actually no longer venture capital. but it is more often even just talent, the availability of talent and the right kind of talent, right? Because when you start to have more and more companies who scale beyond a certain point, you just need more and more people to work.
So you earlier said if there should be more jobs, there should be more companies. So did this startup actually help the employment rate in your country?
Employment rating is a good question. I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but for sure, if you look at just some of the companies that have been created as a consequence of the startup boom, if you will, they are employing thousands of people already within, say, 5 years from creation. So it is clearly creating new jobs. Then the question is, of course, in the economy overall, you have people who are working in different kinds of jobs that are not kind of sometimes no longer there. So you have kind of unemployment being caused by different things, and then new employment by the startups on the kind of other end of the scales, if that makes sense.
I heard that Finland's economy has suffered for years after this decline of this mobile giant Nokia. Mm-hmm. So did these startups also help improve the situation in Finland?
I think they're playing a role. I think what happened, by the way, we still have Nokia, and Nokia, they're no longer so clearly in the mobile phone business, but they do 5G networks and other things. They have a big patent business, and they're actually doing surprisingly well. So, but what happened as a consequence was, I think, this bigger, maybe nationwide realization that, okay, we need something else too. And many of the people who used to work for Nokia ended up starting their own companies. They had really deep technical skills and knowledge in certain niche areas, so they could start their own companies. And certainly the kind of transformation or fall of Nokia, if you will, has, I think, contributed to a more resilient economy.
That was the situation in Finland, and now I want to talk a little bit about Korea. You know, the U.S. is famous for the Silicon Valley, right? The center of innovations, and the South Korean government is actually working very hard to nurture these startups. Mm. So what should Korea do to become the next Silicon Valley?
I think no one should aim at becoming the next Silicon Valley, because you can become something better. And by definition, every place would be different as well. I don't think Helsinki tries to be the next Silicon Valley either, but we're something different. What should be done, though, because it's a really fair question, like how do you create these really fast-paced and flourishing innovation ecosystem systems? I think it's about a critical mass, and it's about a concentration of different kinds of players. So you need the big tech companies that are sometimes investing, sometimes acquiring younger companies, or partnering up with them, or serving as the first clients. You need universities, and you need just kind of grassroots and empowerment in a way, and obviously you need financing as well. So I think I actually really do like the model that Finland has been using with the private sector, with the public sector, that they mostly are more hands-off, but when there's a good initiative which is started by a grassroots movement or an individual a person or a group of companies or a group of people, and it's funded by private institutions, then it might be a really nice and good addition and a booster, in a way, for the public sector to pour in some more money. So I think that's one thing. Matching the actions of the private sector, but letting the private sector take the lead could work. It might be different over here. One thing that Silicon Valley is obviously good at is just the huge level of interconnectivity, both within Silicon Valley, but also to the outside world. So there's people from abroad flying in all the time. So kind of increasing the international appeal of companies out of Korea, or Korea as a country, or Seoul or Daejeon as a city, is also, I think, contributing to towards the same goal.
Currently, the youth jobless rate in South Korea amounts to 11%. So to tackle this issue, how can startup companies help improve the situation here?
By young people starting companies or joining existing companies, I think. Of course, there can be 1,000 different reasons for youth unemployment. One thing could be, and I'm not saying that this is true, but one of the many reasons might be the fact that the young people who are unemployed cannot find an attractive option for themselves. Sometimes, for these people, definitely not always, but sometimes for these people, starting their own company or starting their own initiative or projects of whatever kind could be a good option. If they don't fit in anywhere else, they might just as well kind of do their own. Does that make sense?
So the South Korean economy is mainly reliant on conglomerates and exports. So in this structure, it could be a little difficult for startups to have a chance. So do you think the government should provide more support for them, or should more funds come from the private sector, like capital venture capital funds or angel investors?
To be honest, I think to win, one needs all of them. I think there can always be a lot support from the government is not per se a bad thing at all. It just needs to happen in the right way, and in a way that supports and serves the companies that are being built, rather than being restricting, right? And that's much easier said than done. And I don't have a single answer on how to do that. But if you can make angel investing or venture investing from funds more attractive, and if you can get the right people, some of the brightest minds running those investment vehicles or becoming angel investors, I think that's a good shot. And maybe one thing worth pointing out, I actually mentioned this on stage earlier today, but I think a really interesting view that you can take on early stage investing is that it's kind of on a societal level, it's a selection mechanism for the future. So the people who are allocating money at the earlier stages they are making the decisions on what gets built or what can get built into scale. They decide which companies to invest in, which means that those companies have a higher chance of survival as a consequence of the investment. So it is a big deal. It makes a big difference.
What potential do you see for South Korean startups? What are their advantages or disadvantages, do you find?
Yeah, all the South Korean, both students and entrepreneurs that I have met, are sharing the same qualities. So you're incredibly hardworking. That's very important when you're building a company. You have extremely advanced technology, both from the universities but also from the corporates. I think those two things alone can already serve as fantastic building blocks for kind of the future. Additionally, I think there's a good level of trust among Koreans, or kind of in the society, and that helps with many things. I think trust is certainly one of the biggest assets that the Nordic countries have in building companies or doing anything for that matter. It just makes cooperation easier, right? If there's trust from the beginning.
Sure. You took part in this Exit Daejeon 2019, the Startup Festival. So you came to Korea, and what would you personally like to achieve through this event? Do you want to find more promising companies, or?
I think for me personally, I've been to Korea once before. I've never been to Daejeon. I've heard about it, and I've heard it being called the Silicon Valley of Korea. So I was curious. I have read actually surprisingly many research papers out of KAIST, out of the university, so I know that there's some really high quality research. Mainly for this event is to meet people, right? Meet people who are acting here and meet people who are building the companies out of here. And so far, the companies that I have seen have incredibly interesting technology that they're working on and turning into products. So I'm impressed.
And finally, do you have any advice for these startup companies?
Yeah, I think first thing is to follow your curiosity So wherever your curiosity takes you, that's probably a good direction. If it takes you someplace where it seems like there's a problem that could be solved by building a company, not all problems can be solved by building companies, of course. But if it is a problem like that, then building a company might be a good idea. If you're in that stage, then finding better people than yourself to surround yourself with and kind of build a team with. That's if you do that successfully, you already get really, really far.
So thank you for your time today, Mr. Saari.
Thank you.